Welcome to Technology and Security. TS is a podcast exploring the intersections of emerging technologies and national security. I'm your host, Dr. Miah Hammond-Errey. I'm the founding CEO of Strat Futures Proprietary Limited and an adjunct associate professor at Deakin University. My guest today is Kate Carruthers. Kate is a distinguished leader in data analytics, AI, and cybersecurity across industry, higher education, startups, and board governance. Kate is the head of data analytics and AI at the Australian Institute of Company Directors. She was the Chief Data and Insights Officer at the University of New South Wales, Sydney, for over a decade and has had an extensive career in data analytics and IT prior to that. She's been on a range of industry and government advisory boards. She educates the next generation of leaders through academic and professional programs. She's received countless awards and been named as one of Australia's most powerful women in tech and is known for giving back to community as a member and fellow of many organisations in her field. She's also a strong advocate of women in STEM and host of the Data Revolution podcast. Thanks again for coming on the podcast.
It's really great to be here. I've listened to your podcast for ages, so I'm such a pleasant thing to be joining you finally.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm coming to you today from the lands of the Gadigal people. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge their continuing connection to land, sea, and community. Kate, you were in data and analytics long before it was cool. Can you tell me what has changed over the course of your career?
If you think back to the really early days of my career, the first system I managed, we never imagined anyone would ever want to hack it. I think it had 16 megabytes of memory and it was considered the state of the art, and there was literally no security on that system, and we were so naive and we couldn't imagine why anybody would want to hack us. And in those days, I was a member of a hacking community that used to meet on the steps of Town Hall in Sydney.
So you were the hackers, but you still couldn't envisage anyone wanting to get into your system.
Well, in the early days, it was all about accessing telecommunication services. So people were trying to use telecommunication services for free. And that was the big expensive thing. So the hacking community hadn't really evolved to what it is today. So it was quite a different community. And, people would try and hack systems, but not maliciously, just for the challenge. There was no thought that you could do it for money or anything. So it was a very, very different world.
I teach a course on the political components of cybersecurity. And it's primarily computer scientists and engineers who have thought about information in the CIA triangle, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And it's interesting talking to them about national security threat actors and the intent of state actors. As primarily a data person, what was it that got you really interested in cyber at University of New South Wales?
So when I became responsible for data protection, I suddenly realised that cybersecurity needed to be one of my concerns. And so I went and got my certified information security manager and started delving into it in a really serious way. And I had that long ago background with the hacking community, so I did know some stuff. And I'd managed large systems. So I was global head of digital business for Westfield. And Westfield was basically seen as a Jewish company, so we were constantly under attack by Hamas and Palestinian-related state actors and non-state actors. So a lot of people were attacking us. So we had very strong intrusion detection capabilities in that organisation globally. So I'd already had some sort of exposure to cyber issues, but I really needed to get into it because when I realised that at the university that our data was basically undefended and we needed to tighten that up, and that we actually had some data sets in the research space that would be of great interest to state actors. So that's what really, really led me down the path of needing to care about cybersecurity in a really serious way.
Big organizations like Westfield have the capacity to develop really strong systems, but as individuals, it's very difficult. And for some kind of small and medium-sized organizations, it's also really hard to develop those capabilities. How do you see the future of sort of cybersecurity for those kind of small and medium enterprises?
Well, I think a lot of it, there's a whole bunch of home routers that have just been harnessed in a big bot attack on some large businesses in the US. They're all by routers that are really end of life and shouldn't be still in operation. They're not being security patched anymore. So really one of the things that we should be doing is getting government to mandate that it's no longer acceptable for companies to stop patching those sort of devices, which will be harnessed by bad actors. And the other thing is increasingly you don't even need a router to launch an attack. You just need a fridge with Internet of Things devices. And the thing is there are no standards for those either. So I think really we need government to step up and mandate some minimum for those kind of devices that people don't typically think of as a cybersecurity device. But your home router, if it's an ASUS one, can be harnessed now by bad actors. If it's a few years old router, it's probably participating in a drone attack, a bot attack while we're speaking.
For people that are like, I'm worried my routers, is there a warning sign?
Well, there aren't. That's the thing. These devices are not constructed to do that. So you actually need to know how to log into them. So, normal human being has never logged into their... Yeah. So, we need manufacturers to be told that they have an obligation to make these things easy for people to do the right thing. So make it easy for somebody who doesn't know anything about it to change the password. All of those, 5-year-old routers that are out there are potentially vulnerable to those kind of attacks. And they're being harnessed in big attacks against large corporates or government.
Yeah, absolutely. When we look at things like IoT, we really are looking at a very, very broad swathe of devices and everything from kind of things for children through to family, home objects, all the way through to kind of wearables and so on. And there's such a diverse array of kind of devices that we're looking at making up these networks and systems. It will tell people how many devices are in the average Australian home. And I think this year it was more than 33 or 34. But of course, all of those are weak
points. But now
points.
You can't even buy things without... I bought a new washing machine recently and it's got Wi-Fi connection. I haven't connected it up, but it's there.
You've been working in board governance and with industry leaders for a really long time, currently at AICD. What are the themes or threads that have run through your advice over those times?
It was probably about 5 years ago that the message started to be really strong for board directors that they needed to care about cybersecurity, and they all suddenly started to pay attention. And there was a big lift in literacy as a result of that. And I'm detecting the same sort of shift now with AI, artificial intelligence, where boards are now interested in asking questions about AI in the way that they were 5 years ago with cybersecurity. And, all of the really simple messages that we gave them when they started asking those questions, things like, have you heard of the Essential 8? Some of those might be a good idea, and things like that. So really directing them to the Australian Cybersecurity Centre and those kind of resources, and getting them around the language and the constructs they needed to think about it in terms of, so they could consider what the actual risk was to their business. Because, when you think about a board directors, one of the things they're really focusing on is risks to the business. And cybersecurity is one of the big risks. And I think most organisations have the risk message now. But that risk landscape has just really expanded due to the advent of AI.
What do you think the next lift in literacy will be, or the need for lift in literacy?
I think AI has a fair way to run. We're really, really at the very beginning of that journey. And AI is changing intraday. While I was writing an AI policy recently, over a couple of weeks, doing some consultation with it, 3 new kinds of AI models came out. Like 3 new distinct, separate kinds of AI models. And they're in the wild already, so they're actually being used in the world. So they got invented and within a couple of months were actually being used. So this is moving very, very fast. And so the US is basically having this idea that they will have ever larger models that are very much driven by hardware, so driven by the chips. And because China's been blocked from having access to chips, they've been forced to solve their problems with software rather than hardware. So they're taking a different architectural and design approach to their models. So they're much smaller, but are very highly performant. So it'll be interesting to see which model wins.
You segued perfectly to my next question, which is that you teach a course at the Australian Graduate School of Management. And I know that you've argued the future is smaller and more focused models rather than ever larger and fancier LLMs. Can you talk us through?
Yeah, so I think there's absolutely a place for things like OpenAI and Gemini and stuff, and they're doing amazing things, and each iteration is remarkable. And the latest version of Gemini is pretty darn good. The thing is that they are very costly in terms of compute, and when it's costly in terms of compute, it's costly in terms of resources. Because every time you're doing a high volume of compute, you're generating a lot of heat, which requires a lot of cooling. And that cooling is typically water-based cooling. So these data centers really need lots and lots of water. And water is one of the things in the earth that will become quite scarce and quite contested over the next few years. I don't see, and the other thing is that typically everybody that's using these models, like these very large models like OpenAI and Gemini, is not paying the full cost of them. So these companies will ultimately need to start to get the revenue back. So they will either put up the prices to use them, or we will just keep using these very expensive resources. And these general purpose models, they're general purpose, so they're not customized for your own business problems. So if you're in a business and you've got a problem with X, you want something that can solve for X, not do everything else in the world. And so you will probably, and when I talk about smaller models, the sort of thing I'm thinking of is, having an industry-based model that can work across their own problems with very well-trained model with a training data set that's very, very specific to that industry. And that can be done for much lower cost and much lower computing resources than, say, OpenAI, which cost squillions.
You delivered the University of New South Wales's first enterprise AI system and then led the re-architecture of the cloud platform to support artificial intelligence, machine learning, business intelligence, and new analytics. Can you tell me a little bit about this?
It was about 2018 when we started to have some discussions with some people in the education space in the university, and they had a problem with students self-harming, and they realized that there was a very strong correlation to people failing their degrees and failing courses, and they wanted to be able to reliably predict who was going to fail, but not during a degree, but during an individual course, because, the aggregate of failing several courses in a degree program is what would lead to this self-harm. And we came up with a model whereby we could tell, starting from week 1 of a 10-week course and with increasing accuracy every week. And we were able to, and it's still running today, and we were able to, with 95+% accuracy, predict who was going to fail. So it was a machine learning model that we developed, and the funny thing was the proof of concept took 6 weeks to finalize. And then the business looked at it and said, we thought that would take longer. We don't know what to do with this. And it took them 2 years to work out what protocols they were going to, because you can't just phone up the student and say, hey, you're about to fail. But, so they needed to work out what are they going to, how are they going to approach it? Who's the right person? All of this really sensitive stuff about how do you use this information that you've garnered through. And so the model was running in production, and we ran it against our historical data. It was very highly predictive. And eventually a couple of, 2 years ago, it went live with the right interventions, and it won an award. But it was really out of a genuine business problem, which is part of our pastoral care role, which was we don't want people jumping off buildings. And the data told us, when we analysed the data, if people were in talking to the the counselling service, they tended not to self-harm, but the ones who were outside that, who were failing courses, and we didn't have any leading indicators. So this became our leading indicator.
I really like this story for a few reasons. One, cool program, cool way of looking at a problem and trying to find something new. So congratulations. Also, it is a bit of a parallel for so many of the systems that we're looking at now, which are technically awesome, deliver an outcome or a decision support assist, or in some way provide advice. And then the translation from that technical piece into what do we do with this as human beings? Like, how do we actually then manage this? And this is where I feel like the programs that fall into the AI come a little bit unstuck, because so much of the outcome of them requires input and translation from that technical piece into how do we move this to develop systems and protocols and wrap around the support that they need, whether that's language, whether that's financial, whether that's emotional, whatever it is. So many of the solutions that we look at today still need that translation. You have done a lot of the technical piece, and now you advise people on how to make those translations. What do you think it is that people struggle with, and how can we do better?
One of the important things is having diversity in the tech teams that develop these things. And the other one is to have a product management approach. So looking at it as a product that has to meet the needs of its actual users rather than the people. So typically the users are not the people who you're building it for. So if you can line up the needs of the people for whom you're building it and the users who will actually be using it, you can get good results. And that is often, in my experience, a product management sort of approach. And it's not very often adopted with technology. And, I keep joking, Google has never had product managers, and this is why so many of their ideas have failed, because it's a bunch of tech bros sitting in a room, programmers, with engineering skills up the wazoo, but no actual people who'll ever use it. So, there's that's a really common problem. You've got all these people who know how to build stuff, and they're not your average user.
What do you see as the most interesting or concerning technology and security trends?
Oh, well, the thing that I see it both as really exciting and really scary all at once, is the use of AI to develop solutions. So OpenAI developed their Sora video app, and that was, I'm told, developed by 2/3 agentic software engineers. So only 1/3 of that was developed by humans. And that is apparently, the way of the future. So there's very real issues about that around the quality of the code, because all of the code automation that we've ever done, it's never quite as good as code that is written by humans. I think the code
Can you explain why?
It's because of nuances. Like, I've worked with code automation software for many years, and typically code automation is often very verbose and can be much more succinct if a human writes it. Things like of translating requirements. There are nuances to requirements that even human beings don't always get right. So that's a challenge. And just in terms of what we think of as good code, everybody's got a different opinion. That's part of the problem. But when you're leading development teams, you want the code to be good enough. You don't want it to be perfect, and you don't want it to be too verbose, and you want it to be efficient and effective in what it's doing. And it'll be interesting to see how much. Like, I obviously haven't seen the Sora code. It's not. I don't think it'll be open sourced, but this is one of the things. Is when you look at the code, is it sufficient, or is it so bloated and stuff? So that's always a real challenge. And the other thing is that the thing of this is, like, are software engineers going to die? Like, is that a job that will die in the future? There are many jobs that are going to disappear, and one of the challenges we're going to have is, if we acknowledge that AI needs human supervision, how are we going to have knowledgeable human supervision over AI-generated code if there are no coders?
Or inexperienced coders. Yeah, that's a huge problem.
Yeah. So one of the things we're finding, there's a bunch of academic research articles now saying the people who are getting real benefit out of AI coding assistants are more senior developers, because they know when they look at the outputs if they're good. So they get a lot of benefit from it. But a novice coder doesn't know if it's right when they look at it, so they don't get so much benefit, so it doesn't speed them up as much as more experienced coders. So how are we going to grow our next generation of people who know what good looks like is a real question.
That research is actually really similar to other research which shows that the existing AI models are already displacing junior employment, that they're preferencing senior employees who are able to distinguish between exactly the same question, just in a lot of different fields, what good looks like. You can't actually harness the power of something if you don't know how to assess it.
Yeah. So I think there's a genuine question for every country needs to look at this on its own. So I think the US, it's pretty clear they've made their decision. They're going to get rid of all the entry-level jobs and automate the heck out of everything and deal with it later because that's how they roll. But Australia doesn't have to choose that as a direction. And we can choose a different way. Sure, we might, take on fewer grads than we used to, but we need to still bring them through. And so that we can still have some human beings, because if we're going to, as most codifications of AI rules go, they want humans to have oversight. That's going to be an important thing. The other thing is that people know a lot more than just coding. Just to take coding, for example. So, typically your coders understand, things like the OSI layers and how things work more broadly, and a lot of the tools I don't think are thinking that broadly. And I think that the kind of the future that we need is some generalists, so people who understand the specifics of coding, but more generally, like how the internet hangs together, how it all needs to be built so that it works effectively, and can bring in things like safeguards. So we're probably going to have to automate AI safeguards, and we'll need humans to do that, because we've already seen evidence that AI doesn't like safeguards and tries to turn them off.
How do you frame the challenges and opportunities of AI for business and government when there are so many loud voices at either end of the spectrum?
The way I frame it is we need to focus it in, it's a tool. It's just another technology tool. It's the same as every other technology tool. Maybe a bit cleverer, but we use tools to solve problems. And if we keep our eye on the problems we're trying to solve and the ethical parameters around the problems we're trying to solve and the people for whom we're trying to solve those problems, that seems to me to be a really sensible way to frame it up. I really do encourage, when I'm talking to business leaders, to focus on actual problems to solve, to focus on diversity in assessing those problems so that they are getting good perspectives on the actual problem before they work out what technology they're going to apply to the problem and then try to solve it. Because I think that is often the missing step of people always think AI is it's a new silver bullet. It'll do everything you want. But just because we can do stuff, should we? And that needs to be framed with the users in mind, the ethics in mind, and then the technology coming up last.
What advice do you give leaders as they approach technological transformation?
The important thing to think about if you're thinking about technology transformation for your business, it's important to understand that it is just a technology. It's the same thing as a hammer was back in the day. And we need to work out how to wield it effectively in our own context. So each industry will be in a different context. Each government jurisdiction will be in a different context. And we need to deploy it. We need to build it and deploy it in ways that make sense to the broader community that we exist within's culture. And then you've got the challenge of working across jurisdictions, so you may need to customize it. But I think that fundamental thing of always asking, why are we doing this, rather than just rushing off and doing it, can avoid a lot of angst if you are just being conscious and thoughtful about why you are doing it, and think about trying to explain it to a normal person. The thing is, you can get so caught up in the technology that you can forget that you're doing it to allegedly help your customer or your constituent.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to go to a segment. What do you see as the biggest challenge for leaders in our current technology environment?
I don't think enough of them are actually using AI I think more of them really need to be hands-on using AI and using different kinds of AI for different purposes. So, they need to understand the difference between the different models. They need to be putting the same question into several different ones to see how they perform so they can understand the differences. There's this, we just use AI, artificial intelligence, as the word that we use, but AI encompasses a whole lot of technology that includes things like machine learning, generative AI, large language models, large hierarchical models, so there's a huge range of things that are in that. And now there's agentic models. So leaders need to come to grips with these and start to understand what the different products, commercial products, do and can offer. And I think they really need to get hands-on with it, and they can't hide from it. And I don't see a lot of them doing this, and it's something that I always encourage people to do. Pay for a couple if you can afford it, and just start using them. And the other one that I do, and I tell people not to do this on their work computers, but use some of the Chinese ones because they're quite different, and they're really quite performant too. So things like Kimi 2, DeepSeek, and Manus AI. But don't use them on your work computers, people, please. So there are a number of state actors that we know are very active in the world who run active attacks. The Chinese are among them, and they are building these really amazing models. And most of them, they're open sourcing, so you can look at the code. But the thing that some of them do is they do tend to phone home, and you probably don't want to install them on your work devices. And the thing that friends that I have that do cyber stuff quite seriously, they will typically install them on a container that's very well protected. So, think about protecting your information assets. And if you are a cyber professional, don't do this lightly. And I would seek guidance if you're going to fool around with some of the Chinese models.
How do we help leaders to understand the inherent flaws and constraints that some of these capabilities have? How do we help them understand the risks, particularly for those people that don't have a technical background?
I think the first thing to do is, if your risk people at work don't have an AI risk register, you need one. So you can ask generative AI to give you a list of risks. But every organization needs an AI risk register now, and it needs to be specific to their own context. And increasingly, organizations like banks are really innovators in this space, and they're using agentic models really strongly in typically in fraud detection and customer service, and for product applications. So increasingly, we've got unsupervised agentic models that are running without human oversight. Like, there's human oversight at the top, but nobody can sort of dip into that and work out what's happening where. And this is one of the key problems we've got with AI is essentially it's a probabilistic technology that's in a deterministic world. So to work in business, we want it to give the right answer and want to give it the right answer every time. Quite the case with generative LLM sort of approaches, because they're probabilistic. That's the first thing that I always tell people in my classes, that like, this is the first thing you need to know. They're not going to give you the exact answer every time. They may give roughly the same answer based on different inputs, but you can, and this is why you need to start to use these things to see that they do. Well, one of the things that I tell people is, if somebody's trying to pitch a business case to you about AI, you need to ask them what they mean by AI. Like, what kind of AI is it? Is it a machine learning? Is it deep learning? Is it a neural network? Is it a large language model? Is it a large hierarchical model? What kind is it?
Yeah.
And then when they
if the
tell
leader
you
doesn't
that,
understand that, they need to say, well, what does that mean? What does that do?
Yep.
Where does this
Yep.
data come from? Yeah.
Yep. And the other thing that, and going back to that question, what would I tell leaders? We've only talked about how organizations can use AI. The bad actors are using AI too. So there have been a number of recent attacks, mostly by state actors, that they've used AI. And I did a talk at a conference last year where I did open source research on a target, and within 10 minutes, I got information about their network, a list of their key stakeholders in the organization, a network diagram with affinity modeling of who was who in the zoo, so of their leadership, who was clustered together, so who contact details and potential targets. Like that was just using. I wasn't even logged in.
Yeah, I think people are really unaware how exposed we are, both personally and from an organizational perspective. The volume of data out there is so great, and what it reveals about us, we're very heavily exposed.
This research actually even pulled in Shodan data, so it was telling me stuff about their network. That was literally telling me stuff about their network in real time. And that would have taken weeks. That would have taken someone's weeks to patch together in. And now you can ask ChatGPT and it'll give it to you in like a minute.
You have invested really heavily in community organizations in your field. What have you gained out of giving so much back to the community?
Well, the thing that I've always done is, as a woman in a technology field, I was often the only woman in the room, and I didn't want to be the only woman in the room. So it seemed like a good idea to help others become people in the room too. So that's been sort of one of the things that drove me. So that's what's driven me. And then there's been a growing consciousness over the last decades for me that we need to be much more inclusive and we need to be more diverse, because that table that I was surrounded by, we were all white people. So, that was the other thing that needed to change. So I get a lot out of it. I've also made good friends from participating in this. So I've got some good relationships and wide network. And but the main thing is I'm very rarely the only woman in the room nowadays.
What are some of the interdependencies and vulnerabilities of data, technology, and security that you wish were better understood?
So people are not realizing that data underpins everything in the modern world. And the biggest risk now, especially with AI, it has always been the case. If you can poison the underlying data, you poison the entire data supply chain. And that's why, going back to something you mentioned really early in our conversation, was the CIA triad, so confidentiality, integrity, availability. Of those three, the one that I am the most concerned about is integrity. And that is because if somebody can go in and change the data, they can change your destiny. They can potentially take your life. Data drives everything now. My car, if you've got a pacemaker, it's everything. It's everything in our life now, and it is our lifeblood. And if they don't understand that nexus between data and integrity, that is the fundamental thing. And that is one of the primary ways that bad actors are trying to attack using AI. One of their key ways is to poison the underlying data. And very few organizations are addressing encryption quite seriously and things like that. And I've even had conversations with people who are saying, we're not going to encrypt our data because it slows it down. And I'm like, then you need to differentially encrypt your data in the databases because it is at risk. And this is particularly true for government. So government really need to take account of this. They are so focused often on protecting the data, but they don't understand the real vulnerabilities to attack.
It is so critical that we actively decide what level of protections data in our organization requires and then protect it accordingly. I really thank you for bringing that one up. It's so important. I want to go to a segment on alliances. How can we connect organizations and people better in Australia to create new value streams in the digital world?
Value streams is an interesting way to think of it because people typically don't think of value streams and aren't thinking of how they can hook into them. So I think it's a really valuable question, but I don't think it's in the consciousness of many people. So I'm thinking that maybe what we need to do is, and this is particularly for small to medium enterprise, who we kind of started the conversation talking a bit about, of like they're the most unprotected of all of it. So really, I think that maybe we need to start to look to build out into things like the local chambers of commerce or something, to reach out to that community, because they seem to me to be the ones who are the most underserviced and the most under-resourced.
What relationships do you think will be most important in relation to AI and technology in the next year?
The relationships internally inside organizations, because you can't do cybersecurity in a vacuum. So cybersecurity is protecting against external threats, and information security is about protecting the CIA of the organization. So really thinking about all of that working together, because if you don't have all of those pieces working together and your information and your cybersecurity working together, your organization will be at risk. So if you're not having a holistic view, that's probably the most important thing. And then for organizations that aren't big enough to have all of those people, really think about who you can talk to find out what you can do. There's some good advice that I can share with you for the show notes about cybersecurity for small business.
What's a new cooperation, competition, or conflict you see coming in the next year?
Well, I think the big conflict is obviously US-China, and that's actually probably going to have implications that we haven't quite thought about yet, because of things like all the vehicles that China's producing now that everybody's buying. Once the Americans want us to stop doing that, are we really going to? And we've already bought so many. So I think that's an interesting area of conflict. Geopolitics will start to seep down into the vehicle world, for example. So that's just that. And then there's...
And presumably IoT as well.
Yeah. And then there's all the state actors and then the non-state actors that are carrying out geopolitics in the cyber realm. I don't see any diminution in that. I think that's going to continue, and it'll probably even heat up.
I mean, one interesting component of this too, though, is the terms of service. When we've got such critical dependency on only a handful of key providers, obviously, if they decide not to continue to provide services, that leaves a real critical concern for governments and for organizations, and that places the concentration of power in a very small number of hands.
Well, it's one of the things that leads me to think that Australia needs to start to explore sovereign AI capability with our own models on our own country that we can rely on, should something mean all of these others go away. And, we've had the Cloudflare outage recently. We had the Amazon outage not too long back. And then that CrowdStrike outage. So, you can see everything fall over pretty quickly with those big players. But if we as a nation are relying on only foreigners, so what happens to Australia if Donald Trump doesn't like us? So if he's having a fight with Albo and says, cut off their access to cloud services, to AI services, and they comply, what do we do?
And I mean, the International Criminal Court has had that very real experience being cut off from Microsoft. So it is absolutely a part of that possible future.
And that's what made it, as soon as that happened, that immediately went on my risk register.
Do you think organizations are taking it seriously enough, or it's one of those too hard, too big questions?
Well, the thing that we need to do is take precautions. So, at AICT, we're an Azure shop. We're in Azure, and Microsoft have been trying to talk me into buying Fabric, which is another one of their products. But I've chosen to stay on Databricks because Databricks is open source, and if anything happens, I can fork that code and put it on a server that I own and still run. Well, a lot of people are just going, it's too hard. It's too hard. It's very hard. But, you need to have an awareness of the potential risks and what likelihood and impact they'll have.
It's amazing how dependent and critical technologies become when we just use them every day, and where we don't necessarily think through those implications really seriously. Coming up is Eyes and Ears. What have you been reading, listening to, or watching lately that might be of interest to our audience?
Well, I've just started reading this. But the Coming Wave by Mustafa Suleyman, who's the CEO of Microsoft AI. And I've just finished reading Karen Ho's Empire of AI. So I'm thinking about all of the implications of AI in our lives, that from what the technology is going to do, what it's doing to our privacy, and what it's doing potentially to our jobs, our economies, and our future.
I've got a segment called Disconnect. How do you wind down and disconnect?
Well, I actually realized last year when I took some time off work that I don't have any hobbies. So I walk my dog and I do weights and stuff. But so researching AI is my hobby, and that's how I wind down.
Wait, did you just turn your work into a hobby? Like, is that a flag?
Well, I left UNSW about this time last year, and I took some time off, and I was like, oh, maybe I don't need to work anymore. Maybe I just do some consulting and stuff. And then I was still doing all of the kind of research for AI and stuff. I was like, I don't have any hobbies. This is my hobby. I might as well get paid for this. So I got a job.
My final segment is Need to Know. Is there anything I didn't ask that would have been great to cover?
People need to understand that bad cyber actors are actively using AI to drive their exploits now. So it has taken the bar that was only a little bit high and made it really super low. So the same way that we're able to augment our own workforces, they've now used AI to augment their workforces. So bad actors used to have to farm jobs out to script kiddies for money to help them scale. Now they don't need that. They just use their own agentic bots. So the scale of the threats that are coming our way are going to go up exponentially, and we need to be ready for that. And I don't think a lot of people have got their head around this, and we need to be ready for it. And things like ransomware is still a real threat. You used to need people to launch ransomware. They run call centers and stuff, but this is going to be super easy to do now. You'll just launch your bots.
When this exact thing that you have described happens, we flip the script on offensive. The equation that we've relied on being we only have to focus on the things that we know our adversary is most focused on changes radically, because you can't defend against everything. And yet that is essentially where we're going to be.
And this is why I keep saying to people, we need to think about our data protection from at a really granular level. Do we need to protect every single bit of data we've ever got in a database plus all our unstructured data? It's actually really expensive and hard to do that. Do we need to protect a single item of data like our tax file number, a date of birth, and those things? Do we encrypt those and make sure they're really secure? So we need to maybe rethink how we approach this.
So if you were telling someone right now, what are the top 3 things each leader can do to help remediate that?
The first thing, like every organization, just do the essential 8. Do it. Know what it is, and
I'm
get it done.
I'm going to put it in the show notes. If you don't know what the essential 8 are, you will after this episode.
Please do it. Please do it. So the first thing leaders need to know is that your perimeter has shifted. The perimeter used to be the firewalls around your network. Now the perimeter is wherever your humans are logging in. So you need to defend that. And that's the big shift. The second thing you need to know is people are your weakest link. They always have been, they always will be. So how can we improve their performance? And the third thing is we need to lift the level of cyber data and AI literacy for our management people so that they can't be let just throw up their hands and go, oh, it's all this technology stuff, I don't understand it. It's the modern world. They need to get their heads across it, and they need to understand where the threats are coming from.
Excellent. That's exactly what people need to take away. Kate, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been such a pleasure interviewing you.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed our chat.
Thanks for listening to Technology and Security. I've been your host, Dr. Miah Hammond-Errey. This podcast is brought to you by Strat Futures. If there was a moment you enjoyed today or a question you have about the show, send an email to the address in the show notes. Please rate, review, and subscribe to help promote technology and security.